The space race is one of the most powerful and dramatic chapters in American history, a time when the world looked to the sky and saw not just stars, but a battlefield between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both of them desperate to prove their strength, intelligence, and dominance in a world divided by the Cold War. It truly began at the end of World War II, when the US and USSR scrambled to seize German rocket technology and scientists, especially Wernher von Braun, the brilliant engineer whose V-2 rockets terrified Europe, but paved the way for space exploration. America captured von Braun while the Soviets captured the launch sites, quietly fueling a competition neither side fully understood yet. Throughout the 1950s, the Cold War grew tense as both nations tested missiles, built nuclear weapons, and invested heavily in science, all while keeping a close eye on each other. But everything changed on October 4th, 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the world's first satellite, a simple beeping metal ball that shocked the planet and made Americans feel suddenly vulnerable. Because if the USSR could put a satellite into orbit, they could send warheads across the ocean. Panic spread across the United States. Newspapers warned of Soviet superiority, parents worried for their children, and Washington scrambled for answers. But then the Soviets struck again with Sputnik 2, sending Laika the dog into space, proving they were far ahead. Meanwhile, the American Vanguard rocket exploded on live television, creating national embarrassment and headlines mocking the United States. Yet the U.S. finally succeeded on January 31st, 1958, when Explorer 1 reached orbit and restored some pride, while also leading to the creation of NASA, a powerful new agency designed to win the space race. But the USSR wasn't done. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, orbiting Earth in Vostok 1, a moment that stunned America and made the gap seem impossible to close, until young President John F. Kennedy stepped forward with a bold challenge that changed everything. On May 25, 1961, he declared that America would land a man on the moon and return him safely before the decade ended. Even though the technology did not exist, the rockets had not been built, and NASA had never even put an American in orbit. Yet the challenge ignited a fire across the nation. NASA launched Project Mercury, selecting 7 astronauts: John Glenn, Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Scott Carpenter, Deke Slayton, and Gordon Cooper, who became national heroes as America achieved its first milestones. Alan Shepard became the first American in space in 1961, and John Glenn orbited Earth in 1962, lifting national spirit and proving the U.S. was catching up. But the Soviets kept pushing forward with more orbits, more missions, and even the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, so NASA launched Project Gemini to learn the skills needed for the moon. Spacewalks, long-duration missions, docking spacecraft in orbit, and surviving days in space. Gemini missions in 1965 and 1966 trained the next generation of astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Jim Lovell, and more, who mastered every technique required for a lunar landing, setting the stage for the most ambitious program ever attempted, Apollo. But Apollo began with tragedy. On January 27, 1967, during a ground test, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee died in the Apollo 1 cabin fire, shaking NASA to its core, forcing engineers to redesign the spacecraft, and reminding America that the path to the moon would be paid for with sacrifice. NASA refused to surrender, building the massive Saturn V rocket, the largest, most powerful machine humans had ever created, towering 363 feet tall and capable of sending astronauts beyond Earth's orbit. With the rocket ready, NASA began testing in space. Apollo 7 proved the spacecraft was safe. Then Apollo 8 made history in December 1968 as the first human mission to leave Earth, travel to the moon, and orbit it, giving the world the famous Earthrise photo and restoring American confidence. Apollo 9 tested the lunar module around Earth, and Apollo 10 completed a full rehearsal around the moon, coming within miles of the lunar surface. Finally, on July 16, 1969, the moment the world had waited for arrived. Apollo 11 launched with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, carrying the hopes of an entire planet. 4 days later, on July 20th, 1969, Armstrong and Aldrin descended in the lunar module Eagle, and Armstrong delivered the immortal words, "The Eagle has landed," sending cheers across Earth. Then, stepping onto the moon's surface, he declared, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," as 500 million people watched live in awe. The American flag was planted, lunar samples were collected, and humanity had reached another world for the first time. The mission returned safely, fulfilling Kennedy's promise and proving that the United States had won the space race. After Apollo 11, more missions followed, including Apollo 12, Apollo 14, Apollo 15, and the famous near disaster of Apollo 13, where the crew survived an explosion and returned safely due to incredible teamwork and engineering. By the time Apollo ended in 1972, the United States had landed 12 astronauts on the moon, fully dominating the space frontier. The space race ended not just with American victory, but with a new understanding of what humanity could achieve when driven by courage, competition, and imagination. The legacy of the space race lives on today in satellites, GPS, modern rockets, Mars rovers, and the dream of exploring deeper into the universe, all made possible because two nations once looked at the sky and decided to race toward the future.